Apartment in Korea represent desire and ambition. This is a story about that desire and ambition. My first experience of living in an apartment came in the early 1990s when my entire family moved to a newly built planned city near Seoul. That was built to relieve the population explosion in the nation's capital. That's when I realized that the home we lived in was a direct indicator of our living standards. With lines being drawn between those living south and north of the Han River and between those living in different apartment clusters, even in the same neighborhood. Since then, I moved out of my parents' house, graduated from university, started working, got married, and settled in the city south of Seoul. But one thing has remained the same. I'm still living in an apartment, just as I had done 30 years ago. Apartment complexes are convenient and come with many amenities. Living in a home just outside of Seoul is also more affordable. But driving to and from work still remains a challenge to this very day.
I am and always have been a Panpo kid almost my entire life, living in an apartment that was built in the 1970s and never redeveloped for the past 50 years. Leaking pipes, broken elevators, and power outages were common occurrences, but I was never embarrassed to live in such a rundown apartment, but rather proud. That's because I live in Panpo, one of the most upscale neighborhoods in Seoul that many people want to move to. In Korea, apartments are more than just a shelter, but also symbolize our inner hopes, desire, and future. The city of Seoul is an urban sprawl home to around 10 million residents. The metropolis has one distinct features that can be easily noticed simply by taking a stroll on any of its roads. It's the site of large apartment complexes dotted all across the city. Statistics show that the majority of Koreans indeed live in apartment buildings. According to a 2020 census, around half of Korea's 20 million households live in apartment properties, which take up around 63% of the country's total housing units. This brings us to a fundamental question that we must answer first. How exactly is an apartment building defined? Legally speaking, any communal housing unit that is more than 5 stories high is categorized as an apartment building here in Korea. What we define as apartments are referred in slightly different ways in other countries, but are also popular forms of housing there in any case. For example, what do people in New York City, where housing prices are the highest in the world, think about apartments in general? We spoke to an expert to find out more.
Apartment buildings are a necessary form of housing future Americans. The American population has grown by more than 50 million since the start of the year 2000. And the only way to house all of these new and incoming Americans is through apartments. So a detached house, a high-rise, a condominium, that type of ownership comes with a very expensive price tag. So it comes down to apartment buildings where they rent and pay rent on a monthly basis. So those are the types of buildings, apartment rentals, that are geared towards middle-class New Yorkers, simply because the cost of living and owning in New York City is growing year after year.
The fact that apartments have dominated Korea's property market as such and become the preferred type of housing among Koreans to live in have piqued the curiosity and interest of many foreign observers. In 2007, French geologist Valérie Gilezot wrote a book on Korea titled The Republic of Apartments that explored the history and backgrounds of this phenomena. Hello, is this Miss Gilezot? Hello?
Yes, it's me.
Oh, hi, it's Sumin Kim from Arirang TV.
Oh, 아파트공화국? Okay.
I haven't finished the book yet, but it's quite interesting to see that you wrote about Korean apartments. So, why did you choose to write about it?
The apartment in Korea became a symbol of wealth or of modern life, or they shaped the way to use domestic space differently as in the traditional house. For me, as a cultural geographer, when a form like apartment complex rise like very prominently in a landscape, it's a research question right in front of my eyes.
What is the perception of apartments and condominiums in France, and how is it different compared to one in Korea?
Large apartment complexes in France have a much more negative image. During the 1980s, the first sign of economic crisis appeared, and a lot of the middle classes who used to dwell into the apartment left and became the symbol of the suburbs crisis. And in Korea, it's not only bricks and stones, it's also ideas, social reality, and everywhere. So they have also, the apartment have been very prominent to the urban social fabric too.
Apartments are a fact of life for many Koreans who grew up in them, but I had to ask her nonetheless. How did so many Koreans come to live in apartment buildings, and why do they want to live in one?
Let's take a look back at the history of apartment buildings in Korea. The country's first apartment building was built in the 1930s during the Japanese occupation, so its history dates back nearly a century. Following Korea's liberation, the first apartment building that the nation built with its own hand was erected in 1958 and celebrated at the time as a marvel of construction.
서울교회 성암동의 현대식 아파트가 준공되었습니다. 이 아파트는 시민들에게 편의하고 값싼 주택을 제공하기 위해서 중앙산업에서 서부덕일 기사의 설계에 의해서 완성한 것입니다.
The Mapo apartment complex, constructed in 1962 with 642 housing units, signaled the birth of the apartment cluster, which came to dominate Korea's modern landscape in the decades that followed.
우선 우리나라의 아파트의 한 동이 아니라 단지 형태를 가진 아파트는 1962년도에 지어진 마포 아파트가 효시라고 합니다. 체계적으로 여러 동을 가진, 그때만 하더라도 상당히 우리나라는 역시 전형적인 단독 다가구 형태의 그런 주거 유형이었기 때문에, 그리고 사실상 이제 그 당시에는 이런 오르내릴 수 있는 엘리베이터라든가 이런 형태의 그런 건축 시설도 미비한 상태였기 때문에 처음에는 아주 낯설은 그런 주거 형태라고 할 수 있습니다.
Korea went through a period of rapid urbanization in the 1960s as economic growth accelerated, with millions of people moving into the cities from the countryside and triggering a population explosion. Taking the city of Seoul, for example, its population soared from just 1 million in 1953 to over 10 million in 1988. The 1970s was the age of construction in Korea, as rapidly expanding cities required more and more housing to shelter their new residents.
급격하게 우리가 경제 성장이 이제 60년대부터 시작이 됐잖아요. 그러다 보니까 이촌향도, 그러니까 지방을 떠나서 서울로 이걸 도시화, 근대화, 도시화, 산업화 이렇게 말을 하는데, 이 중에서 많이 몰려드는데 서울에는 절대적으로 주택이 부족해요. 판잣집밖에 없었으니까. 근데 이 판잣집을 헐고 아파트를 지은 거예요.
그만큼 좁은 면적에 많은 그 인구가 거주를 해야 되기 때문에 그 형태는 택지가 이제 제한적일 수밖에 없으니까 당연히 밀도가 높아지는 고층화되는 양상을 가질 수밖에 없다. 이런 뭐 구조적인 그런 차원에서 우리나라의 아파트, 특히 수도권의 아파트는 더 지금 늘어날 수 있는 개연성이 높고.
As of 2020, Korea had a population density of over 500 inhabitants per square kilometer, far more crowded than the US, for example, which has a population density of 36 people for every square kilometer. Given this constraint, Korea has few other options aside from continuing to build more apartments and high-rises to maximize the use of limited space. Korea's rapid economic growth also led to emergence of a blossoming middle class who are looking for affordable housing, and apartments provide the answer.
자, 그럼 70년대 우리 대한민국의 경제 상황이 어땠느냐? 정부의 모든 노력이 수출과 공업 그 단지 개발에 총동원하고 있었잖아요. 그러니까 국민들의 그 동네 환경을 보살펴줄 여력이 없었던 거예요. 그런데 경제를 계속 성장했죠. 경제가 70년대, 80년대 계속 성장했지 않습니까? 경제가 성장한다는 건 국민소득이 늘어난다는 거잖아요. 국민소득이 늘어나면은 중산층이 아주 급팽창했습니다. 그럼 중산층이 원하는 게 많아지지만 소득이 늘어났으니까 이제 살만한 동네를 찾는 사람들이 많아진 겁니다. 살만한 동네, 살만한 집.
So what does every Korean's dream apartment look like? We visited a luxury apartment in Itaewon that may very well meet everyone's ideals.
아이고, 안녕하세요.
시간 들어갑니다. 네. 오늘 집 보신다고
네네네. 네, 들어가시죠. 여기의 컨셉은 뭔가 이제 좀 깨끗한 이미지, 뭔가 호텔 리조트에 온 듯한 그런 느낌으로 이제 워낙 여성분들도 좋아하고 좀 고급스럽고 뭐 그런 좀 깨끗한 이미지로 한 거예요. 저희는 약간 영앤리치를 타겟으로 잡았어요. 이름 딱 들어보면 알 수 있는 분들도 많이 계시고 프로농구, 프로축구 스타들도 계시고 이런 방송 관련된 배우뿐만 아니라 모델 활동, 그 다음에 이런 셀럽들이 사실 많아요. 그분들이 원하는 게 있어요. 뭔가 새로운 영감을 얻고 싶고 뭔가 좀 색다른 걸 원하고 유니크한 걸 원하고 이러기 때문에 앞을 가릴 수 있는 건축물이 없기 때문에 여기서 정말 원하는 그 서울타워의 야경이 영구적 조망이 있어서 그런 장점으로 이제 보시면 될 것 같아요.
It provides a great view of a mountain in the distance. Even at a glance, it definitely looks like a place that anyone might want to live in.
코로나 때문에 재택근무도 많이 하다 보니까 주거의 역할 증대가 많아서 집을 좀 예쁘게 꾸며야 되는 거예요. 이제 그런 것도 감안해서 저희도 집을 그냥 사는 집인데도 불구하고 디자인 감각을 넣어서 조금 예쁘게 이렇게 이제 꾸며놓은 거죠.
That brings up another question. What are the factors that determine an apartment's worth and desirability?
용산이라는 데 자체가 이제 사실은 선호하는 지역이기도 해요. 이 지역 자체에 이제 신축으로 공급한 사례가 없었어요. 그동안 한 번도. 그리고 여기에 이제 개발 호재들이 많은데 그 중에 하나가 이제 미군 기지 이제 평택으로 이전하면서 여기가 이제 대형 센트럴파크도 이제 조성될 예정이고 한남 뉴타운이라든지 이 주변 자체가 개발 호재들이 첫 번째 많아서 구매하는 데 있어서 그런 요인이 되기도 하고.
같은 지역 내에서라도 이제 준공된 이제 5년 이하의 신축 아파트가 선호되기도 하고요. 입주한 지 30년 이상 지나서 재건축을 기대한 투자 목적이 아니라면 마감재나 거주 편의시설이 좋은 신축을 구축보다 높게 보는 경향이 있습니다. 이 외에도 지하철, 전철 같은 이제 광역교통망이 좋은 역세권 입지라든지 500세대 이상 대단지 아파트를 선호하는 편이고요. 저층보다는 조망권이나 일조권이 확보되는 중층 또는 고층을 좋아하는 편이라고 할 수 있겠습니다.
The 2000s saw the emergence of brand name apartments in Korea, and their logos painted on the side of these buildings started factoring in heavily in the value of the properties. These brand name apartments are usually designed and built by major Korean construction firms. According to a market survey asking prospective homeowners what they were primarily looking for when purchasing a home, assuming all other factors being equal, around 4 out of 10 respondents said the property's brand name was the most important factor in their buying decision. Why is that then? Another housing market survey might provide some clues, where an overwhelming 9 out of 10 respondents said that property values were directly influenced by the brand names attached to them. This suggests that more reputable brands lead to higher property values, and this is often reflected in the market.
2009년에 같은 시기에 완공된 이제 경기도 성남 판교의 이제 P아파트 공급 면적 107제곱미터의 매매가는 현재 한 17억 원 정도 합니다. 근데 바로 붙어 있는 그 옆에 D아파트 똑같은 공급 면적 107제곱미터는 14억 정도거든요. 그러니까 매매가가 똑같이 입주했고 면적용이 같지만 3억 원 정도의 차이를 보이고 있습니다. 일례로 P단지는 이제 시공 능력 평가 순위가 높은 이제 대형 건설사가 시공을 했고요. D단지 같은 경우는 이제 중견 건설사가 시공한 단지라고 할 수 있는데요. 아파트의 단지별 개성이나 좀 독특함을 중요시하는 소비자가 늘면서 이런 부분은 아주 당연한 요구라고 보여지기도 합니다.
Let's rewind a bit and ask ourselves, what is the fundamental driver behind the preference among Koreans to live in an apartment buildings? Experts say apartments provide the convenience of amenities and other services in close proximity, on top of being a good long-term investment. And this is why Koreans are finding it hard to let them go. As previously mentioned, many Koreans prefer large apartment clusters that include more than 500 housing units. The construction of a sprawling apartment cluster with many households often lead to new transportation infrastructure, schools, and other amenities being created nearby. This helps to create a self-sustaining community of sorts, where all of the wants and needs of the residents can be satisfied within the apartment cluster or in close proximity.
단지 안에 생활에 필요한 모든 커뮤니티 시설이 들어가요. 동사무소도 들어가고 학교도 물론 들어가고 여기에 필요한 목욕탕까지 들어가고 이러니까 소위 아파트 단지 내에서 생활에 필요한 모든 시설들이 집적화된 거예요. 그러니까 이런 나라는 우리나라밖에 없어요. 이 아파트 문화가.
A report published by the Bank of Korea on the value of housing in the country suggests that apartments gain more value than other types of housing over time and are easier to buy and sell. Other factors that make apartments so appealing are the fact that they use standardized designs that are easier for potential tenants to grasp, offer easier transactions due to the wealth of information that is available for access, and are both easier and cheaper to own since maintenance is managed on a large scale.
그 아파트가 이제 전체적으로 가지는 가치는 우선 이제 투자성이 제일 좋다는 게 지금 이 순간 가장 인기를 얻는 이유입니다. 그래서 아파트는 어찌 보면 하나의 이제 상품화, 규격화가 돼 있기 때문에 이게 어느 지역의 몇 평 아파트라는 것은 하나의 그 상품성을 갖는 일종의 이제 주택이지만 하나의 교환이 가능한 그런 재화로 등록을 한 거죠.
But these benefits have come at a cost. Apartments equipped with all the amenities and services their residents could ever need are threatening to create gated communities that are completely insulated from the outside world.
800세대 단지 600세대 단지 이렇게 만들어 오아시스처럼 주변 동네는 질이 안 좋더라도 그 안에 다 갖추면 될 거 아니냐. 녹지랑 뭐 다. 그러면 담장을 딱 치고 갖추는 거죠. 자, 담장을 치게 된 이유도 주변보다 우월한 입지니까 주변에게 안 뺏기려면 담장을 쳐야죠. 보호를 하려면. 담장을 친 다음에 이제 그걸 판매한 거죠. 이거는 건설사가 지어서 파는 거는 단순히 주택만이 아니라 동네를 만들어서 판다고 봐야 됩니다.
In more recent years, many young Koreans in their 20s and 30s have been scrambling to buy an apartment by taking out big loans if they need to, drawn in by the appeals of apartments as a long-term investment vehicles. Apartments were meant to provide us with shelters and convenience, but now it's become a target of speculative investors and a reflection of the country's growing class divides.
So the price is linked to what? To hope, to like perception of future, what the investment might be. It is so interesting, this example, to see that cities are actually more ideas and projection of people than bricks and stones. And that is why, again, urban policies are so difficult.
아파트의 자산가치 평가의 정량화를 굉장히 쉬워지게 만든 것이기 때문에 뭐 아파트의 이름이나 브랜드, 그러니까 지금 어느 아파트 단지에 사느냐가 사실상 그 사람의 사회적 소셜 포지션이 되는 시대가 돼버렸습니다.
그러니까 예를 들면 나 강남에 살아. 강남에 몇 평 아파트를 가지고 있어. 그러면 아, 너 성공했다. 라고 말을 안 해도 상대가 그렇게 인식을 해요. 대접을 해주고. 그렇죠? 이 아파트는 자기를 드러내는 체면이고 상징이고 또 성공의 대명사다. 좀 이렇게까지 말할 수가 있을 것 같아요.
Living in a large apartment clusters with all the amenities and other bells and whistles you might need is definitely a good thing. But on a concerning note, some are worried about the advent of a world where the place we call home determines our status and our worth in an increasingly polarized society.
Korean apartment buildings are quite insular in nature, with access to the premises often being limited only to its residents. Regardless, they remain popular among homeowners here due to the conveniences offered and their viability as a long-term investment. This may lead to the construction of more apartment buildings and perhaps a growing sense of disconnect and isolation between those living in them. It's time that we set out to discover a wider sense of community.
For young non-homeowners in my generation, the question has become whether we need to invest the money we don't have through loans and such to own a home that we simply can't afford. I hope my next generation doesn't look at housing only as a determinant of one's social status. Rather, we need to balance it out and look at it as a space where people can learn about, share, and internalize the values of those living in them and the community.